On the evening of April 18, 1775, General Gage dispatched 10 or more sergeants, partially disguised, along the highways in Cambridge and beyond towards Concord. They were instructed to intercept any passers-by and so prevent his intended movement from becoming known. That evening, a party of his officers dined at the Black Horse Tavern in Menotomy, now known as Arlington, where also met that day the Committee of Safety and Committee of Supplies, some of whom, Mr. Jerry, Colonel Orne, and Colonel Lee, remained to pass the night. Solomon Brown of Lexington, 19 years old, was the first to report the unusual occurrence of so many officers along the highways in the night, and it was surmised that the capture of John Hancock and Sam Adams was intended. Brown was returning home from Boston when they passed him on the road. Somehow, gaining the front again, he rode rapidly into Lexington Village and reported what he had seen to Sergeant Monroe, and 8 men were sent to guard the parsonage where the Patriot statesmen were staying. Then, Solomon Brown, Jonathan Loring, and Elijah Sanderson, all members of Captain Parker's company of Minutemen, were dispatched to watch the officers after they had passed through Lexington towards Concord. They followed them on horseback into Lincoln, about 2.5 miles from Lexington Village, where they were ambushed by the ones they were following and taken prisoner. It was then about 10 o'clock on the evening of April 18th. They were detained until Paul Revere was also captured at that same location a few hours later, early on the morning of the 19th. The Grenadiers and Light Infantry, under command of Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith of the 10th Regiment, augmented by a detachment of Marines under Major John Pitcairn, assembled at the foot of Boston Common on the evening of April 18th, and at about 10:30 p.m. embarked for Lechmere Point, or as it was often called at that time, Phipps Farm in East Cambridge. They numbered approximately 800 men. The foot of the common was not far from the present corner of Boylston and Charles Streets, and just there was the shoreline of the Back Bay, a large body of water opening out into the Charles River. Since then, the bay has been filled in and is now an attractive residential district, but still bears its ancient aquatic name. The transportation was by means of the rowboats connected with the British men of war and transports, and was thus necessarily slow and undoubtedly required several trips. The distance of the crossing to Lechmere Point was approximately 1.25 miles. At the same time that the British were crossing at this location, Paul Revere was embarking on his mission to alarm the countryside and was crossing the Charles River further down in the shadow of where the Battle of Bunker Hill would be fought only several months later. The British troops landed in the marshes nearly opposite the courthouse on 2nd Street. The water was too shallow to allow the heavily loaded boats to reach dry land, so the troops waded knee-deep to the shore. There, they were halted in a dirty road and detained still longer, that each might receive a day's rations and 36 rounds of ammunition. The invading army, now safely across the Charles River, was really on its way, but with all its precautions for secrecy, its coming was even at that moment being heralded in every direction. The ever-vigilant Sons of Liberty had noticed the unusual movements of the troops after dark, and so informed Dr. Joseph Warren. Dr. Warren quickly summoned William Dawes and Paul Revere. Dawes arriving first was the first to start, and his route to Lexington was through Roxbury, so to him belongs the credit of being the first messenger out of Boston, bearing the alarm of the invasion of the British troops. Dr. Warren had arranged with these two men for this special work, and so they were ready. Dawes had left home that afternoon, not even confiding to his wife his intention. Immediately after the embarkation, he was ready and on his way. Boston at that time was nearly an island, connected to the mainland only by a tiny spit of land, only 100 yards or so wide, that was nearly covered by the ocean at high tide. Due to the impending troubles that were coming to a head between the colonists and the British government, the British Army had added extensive fortifications at the narrowest point of the isthmus. Known as Boston Gate, travelers traveling into and out of the city had to pass through the gate. The gate was constantly guarded and usually locked during the evening. No residents could enter or leave during that period. There was a wooden gallows just outside the town gate where murderers, burglars, pickpockets, and other criminals were executed. Dawes managed to elude the guard at Boston Neck by passing out with some soldiers. His ride was then through Roxbury, Brookline, Brighton, and over the Great Bridge spanning the Charles River at Cambridge into Harvard Square, and then directly on to Lexington. The previous Sunday evening, Paul Revere had been out to Lexington for a conference with Hancock and Adams, and on his return that same night to Charlestown, he had agreed with Colonel Conant and some others to display lanterns in the North Church steeple if their troops should march. One lantern if they went by land, which meant out over Boston Neck, through Roxbury, Brookline, and Brighton into Harvard Square, Cambridge, and two if they crossed the Charles River in boats and landed at Lechmere Point in East Cambridge. This arrangement was made because it was surmised that no messenger would be allowed to leave Boston with the news while the troops were leaving. When Revere left Warren, his first duty was to call upon Captain John Pulling Jr. and arrange for the signal lanterns. Then he went to his home in North Square for his boots and shirt out, and from there to where his boat was moored beneath a cog wharf near the Craigie Bridge. Two friends accompanied him, Joshua Bentley and Thomas Richardson. There was some controversy as to who hung the lanterns in the North Church steeple. Some say it was Robert Newman, the sexton of the church, and others John Pulling Jr., a friend of Paul Revere and a sea captain and shipping merchant. Perhaps it is safe to say that both were involved. Paul Revere had been friends with John Pulling Jr. since boyhood and often served on committees together. Moreover, Pulling's father had been a warden of the Christ Church in the past, and he would know how to go about the business. He was a man of 38, and both he and Robert Newman, the sexton, 23 years of age, are said to have been sons of liberty. The steeple of Christ Church, originally 191 feet high, lifted well above the neighboring Copp's Hill and was the very best place for hanging the lanterns,